Okay, you saw the title, you saw the thumbnail, you clicked, so you know I'm making strawberry rhubarb pie. So behold, my beautiful bounty of strawberries. I just came back from the farmer's market and it is full-on strawberry season now. I'm filming this video on June 17th. I think by the time I'm able to get it up online, it might be July, because I'm in between computers right now. We'll see. But anyway, this is a special variety of strawberry. To Washington State, where I am. It's called Rainier strawberries. You may have heard of Rainier cherries. Well, these are Rainier strawberries. They're distinctive by these spiky green thingies. I don't know what these are called on the strawberry leaves. Anyway, Rainier strawberries, the first time I had them a few years ago, my husband and I just loved them. And to describe their flavor, they're like the strawberriest strawberry that you've ever eaten, plus a slight hint of artificial strawberry flavor. But yeah, there's very intensely flavorful strawberries. Unfortunately, last year we had so much rain in Washington in the spring that the strawberry crops just got ruined. They got waterlogged and they just didn't have very much strawberry flavor. Last year I got a half flat of Rainiers like this, and they just tasted watery and they kind of tasted like green peas. I know that sounds weird, but they just weren't that great. And I was very disappointed and had my heart broken. And this year, I'm really sad to say that these Rainiers, while they're better than last year's, they're just not that good. They're also a little flavorless, and they kind of taste slightly like green peas. So I'm really bummed out. I was going to make a bunch of jam with these and make the pie out of these, but instead I'm just going to freeze them and use them in smoothies because I think that's really all they're good for. So sad. These are another variety of Juneberry, so they have a very short growing season. I forget what they're called. They're from the same farmer, and unfortunately these are also not the best either. Like, I ate a couple and they're still good, but they're not like amazing like local fresh strawberries are supposed to be. I have a feeling part of the reason why these are not so great is they were in cold storage. I can just tell. PSA, do not put your strawberries in the fridge. It takes away so much of their flavor. But these are serviceable, so I'm going to use some of these in the pie. These strawberries, on the other hand, I bought them for insurance, and I'm really glad I did. I bought them from the same farmer that I got these rhubarb stalks from. They are the best farmer at the farmer's market. They have a very long line that's a testament to how good they are. These are really good strawberries. You smell them. Like, I wish you could smell them right now. They smell like strawberries, they taste like strawberries, they're really good. So I'm going to be using these and some of these for the pie. But first I need to make a crust. Okay, so this is my pie crust. I have shown this in a video before. I did a sour cherry pie video and I showed it there, but I'm showing it again here because not many people watch that video and some of you might be new. I'm using the Joy of Cooking's recipe for basic pie or pastry dough, but as you can see I've crossed out things and made notes because I have changed the recipe. Because that's what I do. So my main difference between my pie crust and the Joy of Cooking's recipe is the flour, butter, water ratio. I use less flour and more butter and more water. And my crust is also an all butter crust. At the end of the day, like, depending on what you want out of your pie crust, that's going to affect, you know, the kind of pie crust you're going to want to make. You know, if you like flaky pie crusts, you're going to want to laminate it or maybe use lard. I hear that makes it flakier. If you're more concerned about flavor, you're going to want to use all butter. But not to toot my own horn, but I've gotten many compliments about my pie crust. Last year, a friend of mine died, sadly, and pie was one of his favorite things to eat. So I brought blackberry pie to his memorial. And I made it, you know, from scratch, and I got rave reviews about the crust in particular. And my husband, who does not like pie crust, like, he thought all these years that he did not like pie crust because it's flavorless and tough. But he likes my pie crust. So I think my pie crust is pretty damn good. Not to toot my own horn. So I'll share kind of what I do a little differently and my secrets about it. So basically, I have 2 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 3/4 sticks of butter, so 14 tablespoons of butter, just cut into pieces. Okay, I can't do it from that angle with the camera because guys, I don't know how many of you appreciate how hard it is to like cook while filming when there's a camera with a tripod like right next to the thing you're cooking. Okay, so anyway, I use a pastry cutter like this to kind of start it out. But pretty quickly I will discard it and use my fingers. Because one of my secrets to my pie crust is leaving the chunks of butter in big. When they're kind of like this, I just smush them with my fingers like that. I just kind of smush them rather than chop them. And when you see professional cooks and chefs and stuff making pie crusts, they'll always warn you. They're like, oh, don't use your hands too much because it heats up the dough and then it'll melt the butter and then it won't be flaky and it'll get all tough. And it's like, well, I don't know how hot y'all's hands are. But I don't notice that happening to my pie crust. Maybe I just have abnormally cold hands. I do tend to have cold extremities. My feet are always cold. My hands are often cold too. So maybe it's this special power I have because my hands are cold. But yeah, don't get afraid to get in there. And really, I'm squeezing the butter and then I'm smushing the butter like with my fingers. And I'm making these nice wide flakes out of it. Because my pie crust recipe, I use extra butter and extra water. And the result is a pie crust that is tender, not exactly flaky. If I wanted it to be flaky, I would laminate it. I'd just fold it over a lot as I rolled it out. But yeah, the result is a nice tender crust that really tastes of butter. And I think it's pretty dang good, if I do say so myself. So, you know, when it's like this, it's kind of shaggy looking. There's some big chunks of butter. Some of the chunks of butter are still like not even that smushed, but some of them are very finely processed. Once it gets to about this, that's when I start adding the ice water. So you want some nice big chunks of butter in there. And I think that's really the main secret to a good pie crust. That and like not overworking it and letting it rest before you try to handle it. Okay, so I have some ice water on standby. Now the recipe calls for 6 tablespoons. As I said, I use more water. Although it's a rainy day today, so I might only use 6. 5. I think this is 6. It's kind of hard to count silently while I'm talking. I'll just get a big spoon and start mixing. And I was going to say you'll feel if it needs more water or not, but maybe you won't. If you've never made pie crust before, you probably won't know what you're supposed to feel for. But yeah, as I add the first 6 tablespoons of water, I'll usually get in there with my hands again and knock over my tripod. See, it's so hard to cook while you have a tripod next to you. Ah, I'm so upset. This tripod cost me almost $100 and it's like kind of rickety. Kind of crap. Okay, this feels like it's a pretty good wetness. Yeah, so I'm gonna not add any more water and I'm gonna turn it out onto my counter. I was already turning it out onto my counter anyway. So all you want to do at this part is just kind of bring it all together. And it's okay if it looks kind of shaggy and isn't completely coming together into a super clean disc just yet, because it will do what is called hydrating in the fridge, and the flour will absorb some of the water and the butter moisture. You know what? I'm going to add just a tad bit more water for insurance. It's better to have a pie dough that's a little too wet than a pie dough that's too dry. I'm just going to add like a little more to these little bits of pie dough that are sort of... And again, we don't want to work it so much per se. We're just kind of squeezing it into a nice cohesive ball. This dirty bowl that I mixed the pie dough in, I save it and I leave it. I let it be dirty because I'm going to mix the fruit in it. So just set this aside. And plastic wrap. And I get out my handy dandy rolling pin. This will just help it come together even more. And it flattens it out a little bit so it's easier to roll out. I don't know if you can see this, you probably can't, but there are clear, like visible butter chunks. That's what you want. Now chill in the fridge for half hour to an hour. And I'm gonna leave this mess on my countertop because I'm gonna roll my pastry out here later. Okay, my crust has been chilling for about a half hour. I want to chill it for an hour total, but when it's been chilling for a half hour, that's when I start the next step in the process, cutting the fruit. So every kind of fruit pie has the same theory. You do 5 cups of fruit and then a certain amount of sugar, depending on how tart your fruit is. Rhubarb is quite tart, so we're going to add a little extra sugar in this pie, and then you need some kind of thickener. In this case, we're going to be using cornstarch. So first I'm going to process the rhubarb and see how much of this I have. I hope that I have 2.5 cups. Usually 2 big stalks get me more than 2.5 cups, so I got 2 small stalks, but now I'm worried that's not going to be enough. We shall see. So this stuff at the very, very end I will cut off. So you want to just, I'm using a crappy steak knife because I don't feel like washing my chef's knife. Plus I don't need a chef's knife. You want to cut this into just pieces. You don't want to peel the rhubarb. Rhubarb is a very interesting vegetable. I think it's technically a vegetable. If you've eaten it raw, which I have just to see what it tasted like, don't ingest it. It's like not good to ingest it. I just chewed it and spat it out. It tastes kind of like sour grass, if you've eaten sour grass before, but if you add sugar to it and cook it, it's delicious. So I hope I have 2.5 cups. I mean, if I don't, I'll make up the difference with more strawberries. Yeah, I do not have 2.5 cups. I have like maybe 2 cups. Oh, that's sad. I was hoping I'd have more rhubarb. Oh well. And now the strawberries. So the strawberry preparation here is simple. You just hull it, which means you take this thingy out and then you cut it in half. And if you have like much smaller strawberries, you don't even have to cut them. And if you have like much bigger strawberries, you might want to cut them more. And of course, if there's like any bruised bits or bits that are just not going to be tasty, cut those off. I realized after I cut those first 2 strawberries that I hadn't rinsed these yet. So I rinsed them. As I cut the strawberries, I also wanted to give you all a little strawberry rant / PSA. I feel so strongly about this that I almost made a video about it like last year, just a dedicated video. Oof, that one's very ripe. It's overripe. I'm gonna throw that one away. So strawberries are my favorite fruit. They've been my favorite fruit all my life, as long as I can remember. And I'm a California native. I live in Washington now, but I'm from California. I spent most of my life in California. And I've traveled, around the world, and I've lived in a couple different places. I've lived in California and Washington. I lived in Japan for a while. And I've noticed just wherever I've gone in the world that's not California, anytime strawberries come up in conversation, there's been this like snobby anti-California strawberry attitude that I have just experienced and detected. And it's just come to my attention that people who don't live in California get the impression that California strawberries do not taste good. So I just wanted to set the record straight. California strawberries actually taste amazing. The only reason why you might think they don't, if you don't live in California, is because the only California strawberries you've had were likely imported. And strawberries, berries in general are just like this. They're really only good if you get them very, very fresh. Like immediately after you pick them, they start to go bad. Like if you pick them at the height of perfection when they're ripe, they go bad quite quickly. So any strawberry or berry that you buy at a grocery store, and even farmers markets sometimes, it's been picked underripe. And it hasn't ripened naturally on the vine, it's ripened like on the shelf. So they just aren't going to taste as good. So by definition, really, wherever you live, that's where you're going to find the tastiest strawberries. If you're in Montana, the tastiest strawberries are grown in Montana. If you're in California, the tastiest strawberries are grown in California. If you're in Washington, the tastiest strawberries are grown in Washington. There's some difference. Some varieties taste a little better than others. Some varieties taste a little different than others. It really just depends on what you want. That is 2.5 cups of fruit. I'm just going to do 2.5 more cups of berries. Really is a shame that I didn't have 2.5 cups of rhubarb. I didn't want to have extra and then have to deal with the extra rhubarb. This pie is going to be very strawberry forward, which isn't exactly a bad thing. But yeah, don't diss California strawberries. They're actually quite delicious. You just have to get them in California. All right, so I've got my about 5 cups of strawberries and rhubarb, and since there was not as much rhubarb as I'd like in there, I'm going to fortify it with a little bit of this rhubarb pulp. If you saw my last video, I made rhubarb syrup, and this pulp is what was left over after making the syrup. There's some good rhubarb flavor in there, And I mean, it's actual rhubarb. So I'm just going to add it a little bit to the pie to fortify it. Who knows, maybe it'll make it extra delicious, and then I'll make my pies that way from now on. Okay, so usually the recipe calls for just 1 cup of sugar for strawberry rhubarb pie, but since there's a little more strawberries than rhubarb, and since this pulp here has a little bit of sugar in it, I'm going to add less sugar. I think I'm going to go for maybe 3/4 of a cup of sugar, keeping 2/3 of a cup, because that was the first measuring cup I grabbed. Okay, I don't know if I put this in the title and thumbnail or if I teased it. I'm probably going to tease it, but I have a secret ingredient that makes my strawberry rhubarb pie extra delicious, and this is it. Cardamom seeds. Cardamom is an amazing spice. It's kind of like allspice in that it tastes like many different spices at once, even though it's just one. But these are the little seeds that come in the green cardamom pods. These are what green cardamom looks like in the pods, and you may recognize this. It's in chai. But if you squeeze out the little seeds, that's these things. And this is where all the flavor is. And I just put a teaspoon of this into my filling. Cardamom, it has a flavor, it's sort of like, it's lemony and peppery and floral, I feel like, are good ways of describing it. And all of those flavors go super, super well with strawberries. Like black pepper goes really well with strawberries, lemon goes really well with strawberries, and like floral things like rose water and lavender go super well with strawberries as well. So I think that's why cardamom is just a natural ally. This is the same spoon I use to stir the crust, the pie dough. Just kind of stirring this a little bit, giving it a bit of a pre-stir because of the rhubarb, not jam, the rhubarb dregs that were left over from making the syrup that I added. But yeah, it's that cardamom that really amps it up. When I make strawberry jam now, I pretty much always, like, I'll still make one little jar without any cardamom in case I want it for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but pretty much we love strawberry cardamom jam. It goes very quickly in our apartment. We use it up very quickly because cardamom and strawberries are a match made in heaven. Okay, now I gotta add some thickening. Now, you can thicken fruit pies with tapioca starch, flour, or cornstarch, and this is cornstarch. I think berry pies tend to be thickened with cornstarch. I don't really know the science behind, like, you know, the differences of all of the starches. They're kind of interchangeable, really. And the last week actually, I made a strawberry rhubarb pie and I used this same amount of starch and it was a little bit runny, but in all honesty, I think it's better that a pie be a little bit runny than that it be too thick. Like once I didn't want the pie to be runny, so I added a little extra thickener and it was gummy. It was a peach pie, I remember. And it was still really tasty, but like the texture in the middle was a little bit gummy where the fruit was. But it's always a bit of a gamble because not all fruit is created equal. If you're using juicier fruit, you're going to need more thickener. And if you're using drier fruit, you're going to need less. Now we want to let this sit for 15 minutes. And by the time it's done sitting, my pie dough will have rested for an hour. Oh, one little thing. I forgot the salt. You want to add about 1/4 teaspoon of salt to this filling as well. It helps enhance the flavor. Okay, now we let it rest. So right after I made the filling, I turned the oven on to 425 and I have racks at the bottom of the oven. If you want to prevent a soggy bottom, that's what you do. And then I have that drip pan there to catch any pie drippings. Okay, it is time to roll out my crust. So I make sure to keep one of my pieces of plastic wrap like sort of intact and I don't throw it away because inevitably there's going to be a little bit of pie dough left over. And I save that bit, and I usually make a tiny little mini hand pie out of it. I'm just gonna put all the leftover bits of pie dough from when I was assembling it on the counter, along with some flour. Put half of this back in the fridge. You know, I was dumb. Usually I like to do a little more than half for the bottom crust. And I'm just stacking these on top of each other so that they will form a more circle-like shape. Now, it is difficult to roll out pie crust in a nice perfect circle without it cracking at all. There are some tricks to the trade. Often it just means that your crust is too dry. if it cracks a lot when you try to roll it out. But also, if you put too much pressure on it, like in the middle and unevenly, it'll start to crack out at the edges because it has nowhere else to go. So apply even pressure and be patient. And I add a little more flour as needed. And this doesn't have to be a perfect circle anyway, and if it has cracks, it's fine, you can patch them up. I think some people are intimidated by pastry because they think it's this very precise science where you have to be very careful. And like in some applications you do, like if you're doing very French pastry. But if you're just doing a fruit pie like this, it's very forgiving. Really, the most important thing to remember is to not overwork your dough. Otherwise, it will be very tough. So see, mine is like, it's more like a rectangle than a circle. That's totally fine. I would tell you how many millimeters thick to roll this, but I don't know. I don't estimate very well. I'm not very good at gauging that sort of thing. I just roll it until it's big enough to fit my pie tin. And you want it to be bigger than your pie tin, of course, so it has somewhere to go. That looks pretty good. So center it as best you can and press it into the sides of the tin. And it's not perfect, as you can see. What we're aiming for is to have at least an inch, this is an inch right here to here, maybe an inch and a half of overhang from the rim of the thing. And as you can see, in some places it's not overhanging that much. So if you have bits like that, this is the knife I use to cut the strawberries. Just cut off pieces and put them on and press it on like this. No harm, no foul. And with this step too, especially if it's a hot day, you want to work quickly so your crust doesn't start melting and the butter doesn't start melting. You want the nice cold chunks of butter in there to give you a nice flaky tender crust. I'm just going to pop this in the fridge real quick. So I think I mentioned this in my cherry pie video, that I pretty much exclusively, unless it's a meat pie, I always do a lattice top now. It looks really impressive, and people are going to be like, wow, that's so pretty, and you're so talented for doing the lattice top. But it's actually quite easy to do. I guess the first time I did it, it was kind of complicated to me and a bit daunting, but it's actually quite easy. So you roll your other piece of pie dough, and again, I like to use about less than half of the whole pie dough for the top. I like to use like, I don't know, 5/8, maybe 6/8 of the pie dough on the bottom and the rest on the top, because you always need more on the bottom than the top. And you want this to be like the same thickness as the bottom crust. You don't want it to be too thin because then it will burn or get overcooked. But yeah, that's another reason why I reduce my pie crust recipe. I use 80% the flour that the recipe calls for, because I find that there's just way too much extra pie dough left over if you make the whole recipe, and this way there's not so much left over. So I like to do about 10 strips total, 5 going each way. And you can get all like technical and get a ruler and like cut them perfectly. I just eyeball it though, and I like doing them about 1 inch thick, which is about this much. So I just kind of eyeball it, and I try to make 10 strips if I can. 6, they're getting thicker. That inevitably happens. 7, 8, 9, 10. I just wanted to use as much crust as possible and not have very much left over. This is all I have left over for now. Filling in. Now I get in there with a spatula and I really scrape out, see all this like juice that's accumulated at the bottom of the bowl? That juice has cornstarch mixed in with it. So if you don't take the time to scrape it all out, your pie will be extra soupy because there like won't be any cornstarch in it. So really scrape it. And this is a step that I often forget, but I'm remembering. Put a bunch of cold butter in, and mine is not quite cold because I was dumb and I left it on top of the stove while it was coming up to temperature. It's okay, it's gonna get hot in there anyway and melt and turn into a sauce. Right, so you want to start you want to start with the smallest or the shortest strips on the outside. So I do 5. Looks like I cut these just barely long enough, which is nice because that means I'm not going to have as much extra leftover scrap. 4 and 5. So I press them pretty securely to this end over here. Now, what you want to do to make a woven lattice top is every other strip you fold up. So strips 1, 3, and 5, I'm going to fold up. And then using one of my shortest strips, just going to put it down flat, press it a little bit into the edges, and then put the strips 1, 3, and 5 back down. Now, instead of 1, 3, and 5, I do the opposite. So 2 and 4. 2 and 4. And then I take a slightly longer one, and 2 and 4 go back down. And then I repeat 1, 3, and 5. And see, it has a really awesome effect. It looks super complicated. Like, I've known people to weave their lattices before they put it on the pie and then transfer it. I think that's harder. I don't know. If that's easier for you, do it that way. But I think this is the easiest way. And then there is no more 1. It's just 3 and 5. And that last little strip. Boom. Okay, now to seal off the pie, what I like to do is go around and cut it just so that it's even. I'm not like super picky and particular about how pretty my pie is. I care most of all that my pie tastes good. I don't care as much that it like look amazing and look like it came from a bakery or anything. But if you have like uneven edges of pie crust, it'll cook unevenly. So I like to trim it. And again, I'm saving this scrap along with this other scrap. If you reball this up into a ball of dough, roll it out into a circle and fill it with pie filling and then crimp it closed, you got yourself a nice little hand pie. So I save it. And if you're not ready to do that right away, I often am not. I freeze it and use it later. Okay, and this trimmed pie that we have, now I just fold it. And again, this is where you could get really like fancy and technical. Like, there are better ways of doing it than what I'm doing. I'm just folding it and kind of rolling it under. But this thick edge, it serves a good purpose. If you had it just thin and straight along the edge, it would burn or get like very, very brown. And you'd have to put foil on it to prevent it from burning or browning. But if it's nice and thick like this at the edge, it just cooks nicely. And my grandma, she would refer to that as the cookie part of the pie. And it is kind of like a cookie, especially this pie crust, since there's extra butter in it. It's kind of like a shortbread cookie. So it's a nice little treat at the edge. And again, this is where you could get fancy and like crimp it with your fingers and stuff, but I don't bother, I just do this. One thing I am going to do to make it fancy is put on some egg wash. This is just 1 egg beaten with a little bit of water. And I've put it in this glass container that has a top because I'm not going to use all this egg wash. So I'm going to save the rest of it and I'm going to beat it with another egg or 2 and have it as scrambled eggs for breakfast. Because I don't like throwing food away. You just want to brush it all over. It'll give it a nice sheen. And then sprinkle with a little sugar. So bake this in the oven 425 for 30 minutes, then lower the temperature and bake it for an additional 25 to 30 minutes at 350. Right, it's been baking for about an hour total, and see that lovely spill on the pan? That's why I put it there. So it looks like it's almost done. We could probably use a few more minutes. It is fresh out of the oven, so it is all puffy and bubbly, and now it's the hardest part. We have to wait for it to cool completely before cutting into it. Well, it is mostly cooled down now, and I am going to take a little bite. If you look closely, you can see there's a cardamom seed right there. Mmm. Oh, that is so good. It really makes all the difference to use good strawberries. The rhubarb is definitely there. I think it was the right call for me to add the little extra pulp from my syrup. Well, there you have it. The next time you make yourself a strawberry rhubarb pie, add cardamom seed. It is the secret ingredient that will really elevate it. Thank you to my patrons for making this and other videos on this channel possible, especially Britt, Honey Badgers, Megan M, Matthew, Jenny D, Jocelyn, Gina F, Megan B, Data Fox, Gina S, Ruth, Katie, Lonesome Screams, Mihir, Morgan, Meet Fafo, Britta, Veda, Anna, and Aditya.